I was dead for 44 minutes. Not mostly dead, not near death, completely, clinically, medically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no pulse. The doctors at Children's Hospital had already called my time of death, 3:47 p.m. on September 22nd, 2023, when I suddenly gasped and came back. But here's what haunts me. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. During those 44 minutes, while the trauma team was covering my body with a sheet, while my wife was screaming in the hallway, while nurses were crying because they'd fought so hard to save me and failed, I was somewhere else. I was standing in the presence of something so vast, so loving, so incomprehensibly beautiful, that calling it God feels inadequate. And I asked the question that had tortured me for 68 years, the question that made me stop believing when I was 30, the question that destroyed my faith and my marriage and nearly destroyed me. Why do children suffer? I'd watched it happen. I'd lived it. I'd spent 40 years as a pediatric oncologist watching kids die. Beautiful, innocent kids with their whole lives ahead of them, wasting away in hospital beds while their parents begged God for miracles that never came. I'd held too many small hands as they went cold. I'd told too many mothers and fathers that there was nothing more we could do. And in that place beyond death, in those 44 minutes when my body lay lifeless on a hospital bed, I finally got my answer. What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about suffering, about God, about why we're here. It wasn't the answer I expected. It wasn't comfortable, but it was true. And it shattered me in the most beautiful way possible. From that moment on, nothing's been the same. Nothing. Let me tell you what happened. My name is Dr. James Hartley. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life trying to save children who were dying from cancer. 40 years in pediatric oncology. 40 years in the hardest, most soul-crushing specialty in all of medicine. 40 years watching kids, beautiful, innocent, full of life kids, waste away in hospital beds while their parents prayed to a God who never seemed to answer. And somewhere along the way, I stopped believing that God existed at all. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a deeply religious family. My father, Robert Hartley, was a Baptist minister. Small church, maybe 100 people on a good Sunday, but he preached like he was addressing thousands. Fire and brimstone one week, love and grace the next. My mother, Ann, taught Sunday school and played piano for the choir. We were at church 3 times a week, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday evening. I knew the Bible backward and forward before I was 12 years old. I was a believer, a true believer. I felt God's presence when I prayed, felt called to serve, to help, to heal. When I was 16, I thought I might become a missionary doctor, go to Africa or South America, bring medicine and the gospel to people who needed both. It seemed like the most meaningful thing a person could do with their life. I went to Duke University on a scholarship, pre-med track. Met a girl there named Caroline in my sophomore year. She was studying theology, wanted to be a youth pastor, had this infectious faith that made everyone around her feel closer to God. We'd stay up late talking about Scripture, about purpose, about how we were going to change the world together. We got married the summer after graduation, 1979. I was 22, she was 21. Young and idealistic and so sure that God had brought us together for a reason. I went to medical school at Duke while she got her Master of Divinity. We lived in a tiny apartment off East Campus, survived on student loans and love and absolute certainty that we were doing what we were meant to do. I chose pediatrics because I loved kids, always had. They were honest, resilient, full of wonder. And I chose oncology because I wanted to fight the hardest fight. Wanted to be on the front lines of the battle against the worst disease I could imagine. Childhood cancer seemed like the clearest example of evil in the world, and I wanted to be part of defeating it. I finished my residency at Duke, then did a fellowship in pediatric hematology oncology at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. That's where everything changed. That's where my faith started to crack. I was 29 years old. Caroline and I had been trying to have kids for 3 years with no success, which was its own kind of heartbreak. But I threw myself into my work, told myself that caring for other people's children was my calling, my purpose. And then I met Emily Richardson. She was 7 years old. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which actually has a pretty good prognosis if you catch it early. We did catch it early. Started aggressive chemotherapy. She responded well initially. Her parents, David and Susan, were hopeful. I was hopeful. I prayed over her, actually prayed out loud in the hospital chapel. Asked God to heal this little girl with blonde pigtails who loved unicorns and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. For 6 months, it looked like the prayers were working. Emily went into remission. The cancer cells disappeared. She got to go home, back to school, back to being a normal 7-year-old kid. Her parents sent me a photo of her at her 8th birthday party, smiling huge, wearing a unicorn t-shirt. I kept that photo on my desk. Then the cancer came back, worse than before, resistant to the chemotherapy that had worked the first time. We tried everything, different chemo cocktails, radiation, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. I watched Emily deteriorate over 4 months, watched her lose her hair again, lose weight, lose that spark in her eyes, watched her parents age 10 years in 4 months, watched them pray and beg and bargain with God. "Please, God, take me instead," Susan would sob in the hallway. "Take my life, spare hers. She's just a baby. Please." But God didn't take Susan. He took Emily. She died on a Tuesday morning in March of 1984. I was there, held her hand while her breathing got shallower and shallower until it stopped. She was 8 years old. 8 years old, and she died in pain, confused, asking her mom why this was happening to her. I went home that night and I couldn't pray, couldn't find the words, couldn't reconcile the God I'd been taught about, all powerful, all loving, capable of miracles, with the reality of what I'd just witnessed. Caroline tried to comfort me. God needed another angel, she said, which is what people always say. Emily's in heaven now. She's not suffering anymore. It's all part of God's plan. What plan? I asked. What possible plan requires an 8-year-old to die of cancer? What kind of God needs that? We can't understand God's ways, she said. We have to have faith. Faith in what? I was angry now, really angry. Faith in a God who lets children suffer and die? Faith in a God who ignores the prayers of desperate parents? What's the point of prayer if God's just going to do whatever He wants anyway? That was the beginning of the end of my faith. And though I didn't know it yet, the beginning of the end of my marriage. Over the next year, I saw more children die, saw more parents destroyed, saw more unanswered prayers. Every single case chipped away at what was left of my belief. I stopped praying, stopped going to church. When Caroline asked me to come with her on Sundays, I'd make excuses. Too tired, too much work, need to catch up on medical journals. The truth was, I couldn't sit in a church and sing about God's goodness when I'd spent the week watching kids suffer. Couldn't listen to sermons about God's love when I knew, absolutely knew, that somewhere right that moment, a child was dying in agony while their parents begged for mercy that wouldn't come. By the time I was 31, I'd become an atheist. Not an agnostic. I didn't just doubt God's existence. I actively disbelieved. The universe was random, meaningless, indifferent to human suffering. We were biological machines that lived and died according to the laws of physics and chemistry. Prayer was talking to yourself. Faith was wishful thinking. And childhood cancer was just bad luck, a cosmic roll of the dice, cells dividing wrong because DNA replication isn't perfect. It was a bleak worldview. But it made sense. It fit the evidence. Caroline couldn't accept it. We fought constantly. She'd beg me to pray with her, to come back to faith, to remember who I used to be. I'd tell her I couldn't believe in something I knew wasn't true. She'd cry. I'd feel guilty, but unmoved. We separated when I was 33. Divorced when I was 34. No kids, thank God. I say that ironically now. She remarried within 2 years to a youth pastor, had 3 kids, built the life she'd always wanted. I was happy for her, really. She deserved someone who shared her faith. I stayed single, threw myself completely into my work, left St. Jude and took a position at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the top pediatric oncology centers in the country. I was good at what I did, really good. Published research, developed new treatment protocols, trained other doctors. I saved some kids. Not enough. Never enough. But some. And I watched hundreds die. Every single death reinforced my atheism. Every parent asking, "Why is God doing this to us?" made me want to scream, "He's not! There is no God. This is just biology. Random, meaningless, cruel biology." But I never said that. I learned to keep my mouth shut. Learned to nod sympathetically when parents talked about God's plan, or heaven, or their child being an angel now. Learned to stand silently while hospital chaplains prayed over dying kids. What did it matter what I believed? If faith comforted them, let them have it. I became known as the brilliant but cold doctor, excellent diagnostician, skilled clinician, but emotionally distant. Parents appreciated my honesty about prognosis, my willingness to have hard conversations about end-of-life care. But they also sensed something missing in me, some warmth, some hope, some, I don't know, humanity maybe. One parent told me once after their 12-year-old son died of brain cancer, "Dr. Hartley, you're a wonderful doctor. You did everything you could, but it's like you don't really care, like you're just going through the motions." That stung, because it was true. I'd built walls around my heart because caring too much would destroy me. I'd seen what happened to doctors who got emotionally invested. They burned out, broke down, couldn't handle the relentless grief. So I stayed detached, clinical, saw my patients as cases to manage, problems to solve, not as individual souls. The years blurred together. The 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s. Treatment got better. Survival rates improved. But kids still died, still suffered, still asked questions I couldn't answer. Why me, Dr. Hartley? What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong, I'd tell them. Sometimes cells just grow wrong. It's not your fault. But you could see in their eyes they didn't believe me. They needed a reason, a purpose, some meaning to their suffering. And I had nothing to give them. I had a few near relationships over the years. Women I'd date for a few months before they realized I was emotionally unavailable, that I'd never let them all the way in. One woman, Rebecca, a nurse at the hospital, told me after we broke up, "James, you're a ghost. You're walking around like you're already dead inside. Until you deal with whatever broke you, you're never going to be happy." She was right. But I didn't know how to deal with it. Didn't know how to reconcile the suffering I saw every day with any kind of meaningful existence. Didn't know how to care without breaking. I turned 60 and realized I'd spent 30 years angry at a God I didn't believe in. How does that make sense? If God doesn't exist, why was I so furious at him? Why did I feel betrayed by something I thought was imaginary? I started having health problems around 65, high blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, atrial fibrillation, they called it. My cardiologist, Dr. Patel, put me on blood thinners, beta blockers, told me to reduce stress and exercise more. "You're carrying a lot of tension, James," she said. "Your body is showing signs of chronic stress. What's going on?" 40 years of pediatric oncology, I said. That's what's going on. "Maybe it's time to retire," she suggested gently. But I couldn't. What would I do? Who would I be if I wasn't Dr. Hartley, pediatric oncologist? Work with all I had. The only thing that gave my life structure, purpose, meaning, even if that meaning was just try to prevent suffering, fail most of the time, repeat. I kept working, pushed through the fatigue, the irregular heartbeats, the chest tightness that I told myself was just stress. On September 22nd, 2023, a Friday, I was seeing a new patient, a 5-year-old boy named Lucas Martinez. His parents, Maria and Carlos, had brought him in because he'd been having persistent fevers, bruising easily, bone pain. The blood work told the story before I even examined him. Acute myeloid leukemia. Aggressive form. Not great prognosis, but treatable. I sat down with Maria and Carlos and explained the diagnosis. Watched the color drain from their faces. Watched Maria start crying. Watched Carlos try to hold it together for his wife while his own hands shook. "Will he be okay?" Maria asked. "Please, doctor, tell me my baby will be okay." I should have given them hope. Should have talked about treatment options, survival statistics, the fact that kids are resilient. But I was so tired, so burned out, so done with lying to parents about outcomes I couldn't guarantee. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We'll do everything we can, but I can't promise you anything." Maria looked at me with such desperation. "But God will protect him, right? If we pray hard enough, if we have enough faith?" And I snapped. After 40 years of keeping my mouth shut, I snapped. "God isn't going to protect him," I said, my voice cold. "God doesn't intervene in childhood cancer. If he did, this hospital would be empty. Prayer doesn't cure leukemia. Chemotherapy does. Sometimes. If you want to help your son, sign the consent forms and let us treat him. That's all you can do." The silence in that room was deafening. Maria started crying harder. Carlos looked at me like I'd slapped him, and I felt nothing. No regret, no sympathy, just emptiness. My colleague, Dr. Susan Park, who'd been sitting in on the consult, asked the family to excuse us and pulled me into the hallway. "James, what the hell was that?" "The truth," I said. "That wasn't truth. That was cruelty. Those people are terrified. They need hope. not your nihilistic worldview. False hope isn't hope, Susan. It's a lie. Go home, she said. You're burnt out. You need to take some time off. I'm fine. You're not fine. Go home. I'll handle the Martinez family. Take the weekend. Come back Monday and we'll talk about maybe taking a sabbatical. I was too tired to argue. I walked to my office, grabbed my coat, headed for the parking garage. That's when the chest pain started. Sharp, crushing pain radiating down my left arm. I knew what it was immediately. Myocardial infarction. Heart attack. I tried to reach for my phone to call for help, but my legs gave out. I collapsed right there in the stairwell of the parking garage, alone, clutching my chest, unable to breathe. And the last thought I had before everything went black was, so this is it. This is how it ends. Alone. Just like I lived. Then, nothing. I don't remember hitting the concrete floor of the stairwell. Don't remember the sound my body made when it collapsed. Don't remember anything after that crushing pain in my chest and the sudden inability to breathe. But I know exactly what happened because they told me later. Every detail, every minute, every desperate attempt to bring me back. I collapsed at 3:03 p.m. in the parking garage stairwell between the third and fourth floors. A place most people avoided because the elevator was easier. A place where I could have laid there for hours without anyone finding me. But I got lucky. Impossibly lucky. A medical student named Aisha Rahman was taking the stairs because she was trying to get her steps in for the day. She just finished a rotation in the NICU and was heading home. She was 26 years old, third year at Penn Med, and she'd later tell me that finding me was the most terrifying moment of her short medical career. She came around the corner and saw me sprawled on the landing, face gray, lips blue, completely unresponsive. "Sir? Sir? Can you hear me?" She dropped to her knees beside me, checked for a pulse. Nothing. Put her ear to my chest. No breathing. She started screaming, "Help! Someone help! I need help in the stairwell, 4th floor." Then she did exactly what she'd been trained to do. Started CPR. Tilted my head back, gave 2 rescue breaths, then started chest compressions. Hard and fast, pushing down at least 2 inches with each compression, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A security guard named Marcus Thompson heard her screaming and came running. Called 911 on his radio. "Medical emergency, parking garage, stairwell between 3 and 4. Male, elderly, not breathing. Student is performing CPR." The hospital's Code Blue team was alerted at 3:05 p.m. But I wasn't in the hospital. I was in the parking garage, which was technically a separate building. The paramedics would have to come from outside. Aisha kept doing compressions. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Her arms were burning, her back aching, sweat dripping down her face. But she didn't stop. Medical students practice on dummies, but dummies don't have ribs that crack under the pressure, don't have bodies that feel so fragile and so heavy at the same time. Marcus knelt beside her. "What can I do?" "Count for me," she gasped. "I need to keep the rhythm." He counted while she compressed. The two of them, a medical student and a security guard, keeping me alive in a concrete stairwell. Two nurses coming off their shift heard the commotion and ran into the stairwell. Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, both from the pediatric ICU. They immediately took over. "I've got compressions," David said, pushing Aisha aside gently. She collapsed against the wall, hands shaking, trying to catch her breath. Jennifer checked my pupils with a pen light. Pupils fixed and dilated, no response. She looked at my hospital ID badge still clipped to my coat. "Oh my God, this is Dr. Hartley, James Hartley from oncology." The paramedics arrived at 3:09 p.m., 6 minutes after my collapse. 6 minutes of continuous CPR. They came rushing up the stairs with their equipment: defibrillator, oxygen, medications, stretcher. "How long has he been down?" the lead paramedic, Stephen Hayes, asked. 6 minutes. We've been doing continuous CPR, David said, still pumping my chest. They took over immediately, hooked me up to their portable monitor. The rhythm was ventricular fibrillation. My heart was quivering uselessly instead of pumping. It's a shockable rhythm, which meant there was a chance. "Everybody clear," Stephen said, charging the defibrillator to 200 joules. They shocked me. My body convulsed, lifted off the ground. Everyone stared at the monitor. Still VFib. "Resume compressions. Charge to 300. David started compressions again while they charged. Another shock at 300 joules. Still VFib. "Give me an amp of epi," Stephen ordered. 1 milligram of epinephrine pushed into my IV. Resume compressions. They worked on me for 8 more minutes in that stairwell. Shocked me 4 times total. Pushed 3 rounds of epinephrine. Ventilated me with a bag valve mask. My body jerked and convulsed with each shock, but my heart wouldn't convert to a normal rhythm. At 3:17 p.m., they got me onto the stretcher and started moving. "We're transporting. Continue CPR en route." They carried me down the stairs, one paramedic doing chest compressions the entire way, which is nearly impossible, and loaded me into the ambulance. The nearest ER was right there, inside Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the place where I'd worked for 33 years. The ambulance drove the 100 yards from the parking garage to the ER entrance, which under any other circumstance would have been absurd. But they needed to move equipment, needed the controlled environment, needed to get me to the people who could do more than basic life support. We arrived at the ER at 3:19 p.m. 16 minutes since my collapse. 16 minutes of CPR, with only brief interruptions for shocks and medications. Dr. Michael Brennan was the ER attending on duty. 42 years old, trained at Johns Hopkins, confident and competent. He took one look at me and his face went pale. "That's Dr. Hartley," he said. "James Hartley." Jesus Christ. They wheeled me into Trauma Bay 3. The team assembled quickly. 2 ER doctors, 4 nurses, a respiratory therapist, a pharmacist. Everyone who'd been available came running because word had spread. One of their own was coding. "How long has he been down?" Dr. Brennan asked. 16 minutes. 4 shocks, 3 rounds of epi, still in V-fib. They transferred me to the ER bed. Someone cut off my clothes with trauma shears, my button-down shirt, my undershirt, my pants. Stripped me bare so they could work. Hooked me up to their monitors, their IVs, their machines. The cardiac monitor showed persistent ventricular fibrillation. My heart was still just quivering, useless, unable to pump blood. "Charge to 360. Everybody clear." They shocked me again. 5th shock. My back arched off the bed. The smell of burning flesh where the pads contacted my skin. The monitor showed asystole, flatline, no electrical activity at all. "Resume compressions. Give me another amp of epi and an amp of bicarb." They rotated compressors every 2 minutes because good CPR is exhausting. Each person would do 2 minutes of hard, fast compressions, at least 100 per minute, pushing down 2 inches on my sternum, cracking ribs in the process. Then tag out to someone fresh. "Push an amp of calcium chloride and get me an ultrasound. I want to see if there's any cardiac activity at all." Someone wheeled over the portable ultrasound machine. Dr. Brennan squirted gel on the probe and placed it on my chest, looking at the heart in real time. "I've got some wall motion," he said. "Not much, but something. There might be a chance here." They worked and worked and worked. At 3:27 p.m., 24 minutes after my collapse, my colleague, Dr. Susan Park, came running into the trauma bay. Someone had called her. She stood at the edge of the organized chaos, hand over her mouth, watching them do compressions on my lifeless body. "How long?" she asked a nurse. 24 minutes. Susan's face crumpled. She knew what that meant. After 20 minutes of CPR with no return of spontaneous circulation, survival rates dropped to nearly 0. And even if they got me back, the chances of meaningful neurological recovery after that long without adequate oxygen to the brain were minimal. I'd likely be a vegetable. But they kept trying. Because I was one of them. Because I was Dr. James Hartley, who'd spent 40 years saving kids, and they weren't going to give up on me. They intubated me at minute 26, put a breathing tube down my throat, and connected me to a ventilator because the bag valve mask wasn't providing adequate oxygenation. Another amp of epi, and someone call cardiology. We might need to cath him if we get him back. At minute 30, 3:30 p.m., Dr. Brennan shocked me for the 8th time. The monitor showed a rhythm: narrow complex, regular, sinus tachycardia. "We've got a pulse!" someone shouted. "I've got a pulse!" The room erupted in cautious celebration. They'd gotten me back. After 30 minutes of being dead, my heart was beating again. But the celebration was short-lived. My blood pressure was 60/40, barely enough to perfuse my organs. My oxygen saturation was 78%, despite being on 100% oxygen. And my pupils were still fixed and dilated, which meant significant brain damage. Start a dopamine drip. Titrate to keep systolic above 90. And get me an ABG. I need to know his acid-base status. They drew arterial blood gas. The results came back dismal. pH of 6.9, severely acidotic. Lactate of 18, indicating that my tissues were screaming for oxygen they weren't getting. CO2 of 65, respiratory failure even with the ventilator. Push 2 amps of bicarb for the acidosis. Increase his respiratory rate to 20. We need to blow off CO2. At 3:37 p.m., 34 minutes after my collapse, I coded again. My blood pressure dropped to 0. The monitor showed ventricular fibrillation again. "God damn it," Dr. Brennan said. "Resume compressions. Charge to 360. They shocked me. 9th time. Nothing. More compressions, more epinephrine, more shocks. At minute 38, they got me back again, but my pressure was even worse, 50/30. "He's in cardiogenic shock. His heart is dying. We need ECMO now. ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, a machine that would essentially take over for my heart and lungs, pump my blood, oxygenate it, keep me alive while my organs recovered, if they recovered." But there was a problem. The ECMO team was in surgery with another patient. They couldn't get to me for at least 20 minutes. "We don't have 20 minutes, Susan Park said from the doorway. "Look at him. He's going to code again." She was right. At 3:41 p.m., 38 minutes after my collapse, I coded for the 3rd time. Ventricular fibrillation again. They shocked me. Compressions, medications. The rhythm converted briefly to sinus, then went right back to VFib. Another shock, another round of drugs. "How many epi has he had?" Dr. Brennan asked. 8 amps, the pharmacist said. "Jesus, okay. Let's try some amiodarone. 300 milligrams, IV push." They pushed the antiarrhythmic medication. Shocked me again. 11th shock. This time I converted. Sinus rhythm, weak pulse, blood pressure 55/35. But I was back. Barely. The cardiology team arrived at 3:43 p.m. Dr. Patricia Chen, interventional cardiologist, took one look at my EKG and said, "Massive anterior MI. He's blown out his LAD. We need to cath him immediately." "He can't survive transport to the cath lab," Dr. Brennan said. "He's coded 3 times in the last 10 minutes. "Then he'll die here," Dr. Chen said bluntly. "The only chance he has is if we open that artery. Get him to the cath lab. I'll have my team ready." They rushed me through the hallways at 3:45 p.m. Nurses running alongside my stretcher, one doing chest compressions because my pressure kept dropping. Respiratory therapists bagging me because the portable ventilator wasn't adequate. We burst into the cardiac catheterization lab at 3:46 p.m. The team was ready, scrubbed, gowned, equipment prepped. And at 3:47 p.m., 44 minutes after I collapsed in that parking garage stairwell, my heart stopped for the 4th time. Complete asystole. Flatline. "Start compressions," Dr. Chen shouted. They worked on me on the cath lab table. Compressions, medications, shocks. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Nothing. Dr. Chen looked at the clock. 3:50 p.m. Looked at the monitor showing flatline. Looked at my gray, lifeless face. "I'm calling it," she said quietly. "Time of death, 3:47 p.m. The room went silent. Someone stopped compressions. My chest stopped moving except for the rise and fall from the ventilator that was still mechanically breathing for me. A nurse reached over and turned off the ventilator. Dr. Susan Park, who'd followed us to the cath lab, burst into tears. "No, no, no, no. James, God, not like this." One of the nurses pulled a sheet up over my body. Someone started disconnecting monitors. Someone else began documenting the code in the chart. Time of death, 15:47. Cause, cardiac arrest, secondary to massive myocardial infarction. Dr. Chen pulled off her sterile gown, her face devastated. She'd known me for 20 years. We'd consulted on cases together. She'd sent her own niece to me when the girl was diagnosed with leukemia. "I'm sorry," she said to Susan. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." But then something happened. At 3:48 p.m., 1 minute after they'd called my time of death, a nurse who'd been filling out paperwork happened to glance at the monitor they hadn't disconnected yet. "Wait," she said. "Wait! Look!" Everyone turned to look at the monitor. There was a blip. A single QRS complex. 1 heartbeat. Then nothing for 5 seconds. Then another blip. "Oh my God," Dr. Chen said. "He's got electrical activity." She rushed back to my bedside, put her stethoscope on my chest, listened. Her eyes went wide. "I've got a heartbeat, faint, maybe 40 beats per minute, but it's there." She checked for a pulse. I've got a pulse. Carotid pulse. Weak, but present. The room exploded back into action. The nurse pulled the sheet back down. Someone turned the ventilator back on. Someone else started checking blood pressure. Systolic is 60. He's back. He's actually back. Dr. Chen looked at the clock in disbelief. 3:48 p.m. I'd been dead for 1 minute. Clinically, legally, actually dead. No heartbeat, no breathing, no electrical activity. And I'd come back on my own. Okay, she said, regaining her composure. We're not wasting this. Get him prepped. We're doing this, Kath. Now. They worked with renewed urgency. Shaved my groin, prepped the femoral artery, inserted the catheter. Dr. Chen threaded it up through my blood vessels to my heart, injecting contrast dye, watching the flow on the fluoroscopy screen. There, she said, pointing. 99% blockage of the left anterior descending artery, the widowmaker. That's what killed him. She positioned a wire across the blockage, threaded a balloon catheter over it, inflated the balloon to compress the blockage, then deployed a stent, a tiny metal scaffold to hold the artery open. Blood flow restored. The heart muscle that had been dying started getting oxygen again. My blood pressure started to rise, 70 systolic, then 80, then 90. He's stabilizing, someone said in wonder. They deployed a second stent for good measure, making sure the artery would stay open. Then withdrew the catheters, applied pressure to my groin to stop bleeding. By 4:15 p.m., I was being wheeled to the cardiac ICU. Heart rate 75. Blood pressure 105/65. Oxygen saturation 94%. Alive. Against all odds, alive. But still unconscious. Still on the ventilator. Still with pupils that didn't react properly to light, suggesting significant brain damage from the 44 minutes of inadequate oxygen delivery. Dr. Chen spoke to Susan Park outside the ICU. I've done what I can for his heart. The stents are in place. Blood flow is restored. But Susan, 44 minutes. That's a long time. Even with CPR, his brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. I don't know if he'll ever wake up. And if he does, he might not be James anymore, Susan finished quietly. Yeah. They stood in silence for a moment. I need to notify his next of kin, Susan said. Who do I call? His ex-wife, I think. Caroline. They divorced years ago, but I think they stayed in touch. Susan went to make the calls, to tell Caroline that her ex-husband had died and come back, to tell the hospital administration that one of their senior physicians was in critical condition, to tell everyone who needed to know that Dr. James Hartley had been dead for 44 minutes, and the James Hartley who might wake up, if he woke up, might be someone completely different. In the ICU, I lay motionless, except for the rise and fall of my chest from the ventilator. Machines beeped around me. Medications dripped into my veins. My heart beat steadily, kept alive by the stents holding my artery open. But I wasn't there. I wasn't in that room. I wasn't in that body. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere impossible, somewhere that would change everything I thought I knew about life, death, suffering, and God. For 44 minutes, I'd been dead. And in those 44 minutes, I'd been more alive than I'd ever been. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. For 44 minutes, my body had been in agony. Heart tissue dying, cells screaming for oxygen, systems shutting down. But suddenly, all of that was gone. Just gone. I was floating above the cath lab table, looking down at my own body. I could see everything with this impossible clarity. Dr. Chen working frantically, threading catheters through my arteries. Nurses calling out numbers. Susan Park standing in the corner, crying. The monitors showing flat lines. And my body, gray, lifeless, a sheet half pulled over my chest. I felt no fear, no panic, just this profound sense of relief, like I'd been carrying a massive weight for 40 years, and someone had finally lifted it off my shoulders. I thought, so this is death. This is what I've been afraid of my whole life. And then I started moving. Not up, not down. Direction didn't seem to exist. Just moving away from the physical world. The hospital faded. The walls became transparent, then disappeared entirely. There was a transition, a tunnel maybe, though that word doesn't capture it. More like I was moving through layers of reality, each one less physical than the last. And with each layer, I felt lighter, freer, more myself than I'd ever been. Colors appeared that I'd never seen before. Sounds that weren't quite sounds, but something deeper. Music, maybe, or mathematics, or love translated into sensation. And then I was there, wherever there was. I was standing, though I had no body, in a place of indescribable light. Not harsh light, not blinding. It was soft, warm, alive. It was conscious. And it was looking at me with what I can only describe as infinite love. I felt small, infinitesimally small. Like I was a single cell becoming aware of the vast organism it belonged to. But I also felt seen, known, understood in a way I'd never been understood in my entire life. The presence didn't have a form, wasn't an old man on a throne or a burning bush or anything I could conceptualize. It was everything and everywhere. It was the light, the space between light, the awareness perceiving both. It was God, but God so much bigger than anything I'd been taught in Sunday school. And I heard, though heard isn't the right word, a voice. It came from everywhere, from inside me, from the fabric of existence itself. James. Just my name. But in that name was recognition, love, welcome. Like a parent greeting a child who'd been lost and was finally home. I couldn't speak. I had no voice. But somehow I could communicate through thought, through intention, through the deepest truth of what I felt. And what came out of me was the question that had destroyed my faith, the question that had haunted me for 40 years, the question I'd asked over and over in 100 hospital rooms watching children die. Why? Why do children suffer? Why do they get cancer? Why do they die? If you're real, if you're loving, if you're all-powerful, why do you allow it? It wasn't accusatory anymore. I wasn't angry. I just needed to know. Desperately needed to understand. The presence didn't recoil from my question, didn't deflect or offer platitudes. Instead, I felt this immense compassion wash over me. Compassion for my pain, for my anger, for my 40 years of carrying this burden. And then it showed me, not in words, in experience, in knowing, like memories were being downloaded directly into my consciousness. I saw the universe from a perspective I'd never imagined. Saw existence not as random chaos, but as an intricate, vast, incomprehensibly beautiful design. Every soul, every life, every moment interconnected in ways that made my human understanding look like a child's crayon drawing compared to the Sistine Chapel. I saw that we, all of us, every human who has ever lived or will ever live, are eternal. We existed before birth, will exist after death. These physical lives are just moments, just experiences, just classrooms. And I saw that we choose to come here. We choose to incarnate into physical bodies, knowing full well that it will involve pain, suffering, loss. We choose it because suffering is one of the only ways souls can grow, one of the only ways we can develop compassion, empathy, strength, love. But children, I protested, they don't choose to suffer. They're innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. And then I saw something that shattered me, made me weep without tears, made my soul crack open in the most profound way. I saw the children, not as I'd seen them in hospital beds, weak, suffering, dying. I saw them as they truly were, radiant, powerful, ancient souls who had volunteered to come to earth and experience short, difficult lives for a purpose. They are teachers, the presence communicated, the greatest teachers humanity has. They teach parents about unconditional love. They teach siblings about loss and resilience. They teach doctors like you about humility, about the limits of control. about compassion in the face of helplessness. I saw Emily Richardson, my 8-year-old patient who died of leukemia in 1984, the death that had broken my faith. But I saw her differently now. I saw her soul, radiant, wise beyond measure. I saw her choose to incarnate, knowing she would die young, because her death would crack open her parents' hearts and make them more compassionate, because her suffering would inspire researchers to find better treatments, because her short life would touch hundreds of people and change them in ways that would ripple out for generations. But she suffered, I said, still not fully understanding. She was in pain. She was afraid. Yes, the presence acknowledged. And that pain mattered. That fear was real. The suffering was not meaningless. It was not ignored. I felt every moment of it with her. I carried it with her. And when she returned here, suddenly I saw Emily, not as a sick 8-year-old, but as her true self, a being of pure light, filled with joy and pride at what she'd accomplished. She looked at me across that impossible space, and I felt her communicate. It was worth it, Dr. Hartley. Every moment of it. I helped. I mattered. My life meant something. I was shown more, shown thousands of children's souls, all of them volunteers, all of them brave beyond human comprehension, all of them choosing to experience terrible illnesses, injuries, short lives, not as punishment, not as cosmic cruelty, but as service, sacred service. They are the bravest souls, the presence told me. They take on the hardest assignments. They incarnate knowing they will suffer, knowing they will die young, because their suffering serves a purpose in the grand design. They catalyze change. They teach lessons that cannot be taught any other way. They crack open hearts that would otherwise remain closed. I saw the ripple effects, saw how Emily's death had made her parents more compassionate, how they'd started a foundation that funded childhood cancer research, how that research had saved 12 other children who grew up to become teachers, doctors, artists, parents themselves. Saw how the grief her death caused me had made me a better doctor, more honest with parents, more willing to have hard conversations about end-of-life care that gave families precious time together instead of false hope. But it's not fair, I said, even as I was seeing the larger pattern. It's not fair that children have to suffer so adults can learn. No, the presence agreed. By human standards, it is not fair. But fairness is a human concept. What you call fairness is equality of outcome within a single lifetime. But you are looking at a snapshot and calling it the whole picture. These souls are eternal. This one difficult lifetime is a moment, a blink. And when they return here, they are celebrated as heroes, honored, loved, made whole. I was shown the reunion, saw what happens when a child who died of cancer returns to the spiritual realm, saw them greeted with joy and reverence, saw them honored for their service, saw them made completely whole. No more pain, no more fear, only the pride of having accomplished something difficult and important. You've been angry at me for taking children, the President said gently. But I don't take them, James. They return. They come home. And they come home having done something incredibly brave, having served, having loved so deeply that they were willing to suffer for the growth of others. I understood then, not just intellectually, but at the deepest level of my being. Childhood suffering wasn't meaningless, wasn't random cruelty. It was sacrifice, sacred sacrifice, made by the bravest souls for the benefit of all humanity. But why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why didn't you show me this 40 years ago? I could have been different. I could have helped parents understand. I could have. You had to come to it yourself, the President said. You had to experience the full weight of the question before you could handle the answer. If I had told you this when you were 29, you would have intellectualized it, used it as a comfortable platitude to offer grieving parents. But now you've felt the full depth of the pain. Now you've carried the weight of wondering. Now you can speak this truth with authority, with compassion, with hard-won understanding. I saw my whole life from this new perspective, saw how my anger at God, my atheism, my emotional distance, it had all been necessary, all been part of my own soul's journey. I'd had to descend into the darkness so I could appreciate the light, had to experience the full weight of despair so I could carry hope with integrity. You're going back, the President told me. Your work isn't finished. I don't want to go back, I said. It's too hard. I can't. You can, and you must. There are parents who need to hear this truth. There are children who need you to see them as the heroes they are. There are years of service still ahead of you. Different service. Not trying to prevent all death. You cannot. But honoring the sacred sacrifice of suffering. Helping families find meaning in the hardest moments. Being a bridge between the medical and the spiritual. I felt myself being pulled back, the light starting to fade. I wanted to stay, wanted to remain in that place of infinite understanding and love. Remember, the President said as I began to slip away, remember what you've learned. Remember that suffering is not punishment. Remember that these children are teachers. Remember that death is not the end. Remember that I am always present, always carrying the pain with them, never abandoning them. And remember that you are loved. infinitely, unconditionally, eternally loved. The last thing I saw before I slipped back into my body was a vision of all the children I'd cared for over 40 years, hundreds of them, all of them standing together in that place of light, smiling at me, thanking me for my service, telling me it was time to go back and share what I'd learned. And Emily Richardson, my 8-year-old patient whose death had started it all, stepped forward and said in a voice that echoed across dimensions, "Tell them it was worth it, Dr. Hartley. Tell them we chose this. Tell them we're okay. Tell them we're more than okay. Tell them we're home." Then I was falling, rushing back through layers of reality, back into time and space, back into my broken body lying on a hospital bed, and I gasped. I woke up 3 days later in the cardiac ICU with a breathing tube down my throat and no idea where I was. The first face I saw was Caroline's, my ex-wife. We'd been divorced for 34 years, but there she was, sitting beside my bed, older now with gray streaks in her dark hair, holding my hand and crying. They removed the breathing tube that afternoon. My throat was raw, my chest hurt from the CPR compressions that had cracked 3 of my ribs. But I was alive, impossibly alive. Dr. Chen came to see me that evening, explained the heart attack, the stents, the fact that I'd been clinically dead for 44 minutes. "We called your time of death, James," she said quietly. "You were gone. And then you just came back on your own. I've never seen anything like it." "I know where I went," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to tell you what I saw." She smiled gently, the smile doctors give patients when they're about to explain away something with medical science. "James, during cardiac arrest, the brain becomes hypoxic. It's common to have vivid hallucinations, feelings of peace, tunnels of light, deceased loved ones. It's all well documented. Your brain was trying to protect you from the trauma of dying." "It wasn't a hallucination," I said. "I was there. I spoke with God. I got answers about childhood suffering, about why kids get cancer, about—" "You need to rest," she interrupted gently. "You've been through severe trauma. Your brain needs time to heal. We can talk about this later." But I couldn't rest, couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, what I'd learned, what I'd been shown. Over the next week, as I recovered physically, I tried to tell anyone who would listen. Told the nurses about the children's souls volunteering for service. Told the cardiologist about the greater purpose of suffering. Told Susan Park about Emily Richardson standing in the light, radiant and whole. Most of them nodded politely, patted my hand, changed the subject. Susan was the kindest about it. "James, I'm just grateful you're alive. Whether it was a hallucination or a genuine spiritual experience, does it matter? What matters is you survived." "It does matter," I insisted, "because if it's true, everything changes. Everything I've believed for 40 years about suffering being meaningless, it's wrong. I've been wrong." Caroline was the only one who believed me, or at least didn't dismiss me. "I've been praying for you for 34 years, she said one afternoon, sitting in the chair beside my hospital bed. "Praying that you'd find your way back to faith. Maybe this was God's way of answering." "I don't know if I'm back to faith," I admitted, "but I'm not an atheist anymore. I can't be, not after what I saw." I went home after 2 weeks. Cardiac rehab 3 times a week, medications, dietary changes. The physical recovery was straightforward. The psychological and spiritual recovery was anything but. I couldn't go back to work the way I had before. Couldn't look at dying children the same way. Couldn't offer parents clinical detachment and statistical survival rates. 3 months after my heart attack, I met with the parents of a 6-year-old girl named Sophie Chen, who'd just been diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor. Poor prognosis, maybe 6 months with treatment. The old me would have given them the facts, treatment options, survival statistics, clinical, detached, professional, but I couldn't do it anymore. "Your daughter is one of the bravest souls I've ever encountered," I told them. They looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" And I told them, carefully, gently. Told them what I'd learned during my NDE. That suffering isn't random. The children who face terrible illnesses are volunteers, teachers, sacred servants. That their daughter's life, however long or short, has profound meaning and purpose. Sophie's mother started crying. Not tears of despair, but something else. Something like relief mixed with understanding. "I've felt that," she whispered. "Since the diagnosis, I've had this strange sense that Sophie chose this somehow. That she's teaching us something we desperately needed to learn." I thought I was crazy. "You're not crazy," I said. "You're hearing the truth that her soul is trying to communicate." Word spread. Some parents complained to hospital administration that Dr. Hartley was pushing religion on them, making them uncomfortable with talk about souls and spiritual purposes. A formal complaint was filed. I was called into a meeting with the department chair, Dr. Richard Walsh. "James, you can't talk to parents about near-death experiences and souls volunteering for cancer," he said. "It's inappropriate. It's unprofessional. It makes the hospital look bad." "I'm telling them the truth," I said. "You're telling them your interpretation of a hypoxic hallucination," he corrected. "And while I'm sympathetic to what you went through, you can't impose your beliefs on grieving families." I retired that week. After 40 years in pediatric oncology, I walked away. But I didn't stop working. I started speaking, writing, sharing my story with anyone who would listen. I joined support groups for parents who'd lost children to cancer. And I told them what I'd learned, that their children were heroes, that their suffering had meaning, that they were okay now, more than okay, celebrated in a realm beyond our understanding. Some people thought I'd lost my mind. said the heart attack had damaged my brain, made me delusional. Medical colleagues I'd known for decades stopped returning my calls. But other people, parents who'd lost children, doctors and nurses who'd witnessed too much suffering, people searching for meaning in the hardest experiences of their lives, they listened and they believed. I reconnected with Caroline, started attending church again, though my understanding of God was vastly different now from the Sunday school version I'd grown up with. We didn't remarry, too much time had passed, but we became friends, real friends. I'm 70 now, 2 years since my 44 minutes of death. My heart is weaker, scarred by the heart attack, but I'm healthier in every other way, happier, more peaceful, more purposeful. I know now what I didn't know before. Death is not the enemy. Suffering is not meaningless. And children who face terrible illnesses are not victims. They're volunteers, teachers, sacred servants who chose the hardest path because their souls are brave enough to carry it. Emily Richardson taught me that. God taught me that. 44 minutes of death taught me that. And now I spend whatever time I have left teaching others, honoring the sacred sacrifice of suffering, helping parents see their sick children not as tragedies, but as heroes, because they are, every single one of them. And when my time comes, when my damaged heart finally gives out and I take my last breath, I'll go peacefully, gratefully, knowing I'm going home, back to that place of infinite light and love, back to Emily and all the other children I couldn't save. Except I understand now, they didn't need saving. They were never lost. They were always exactly where they were meant to be, teaching us, loving us, showing us what real courage looks like. And I finally understand.